Hi, you are in the ladies' room with Dr. Donica, the only public ladies' room you can enter anytime without ever waiting online. I'm your host, Dr. Donica Moore. We'll be having real conversations with real women about really intimate issues. They may be embarrassing, sad, or funny, but they will always be interesting and informative. You know, like the best conversations you've had in ladies' rooms with your best friends, or total strangers and a physician. Please join us.
Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Now, you've heard a lot of doctors, including your own and me and all the ones who've ever been guests in the Ladies' Room, talk about the importance of diet and exercise from many different perspectives, to the point where some of us just tune out when we hear diet and exercise. But stay with me, because today we're going to break down nutritional information into the particularly exciting arena of cellular nutrition and preventing age-associated cellular decline. And if you don't know what that is, you really need to listen. Our guest today has been dancing through life from a young age. Dr. Noelle Reid is a board-certified family medicine physician who was a trained dancer prior to going to medical school. She then bridged her love for dance through the practice of yoga, Pilates, and movement, which she has creatively made into a focal point of her medical practice, which unfortunately is not in New Jersey. She's in California. She's also a graduate of the University of Chicago Pritzker School of Medicine and completed her residency at Harbor UCLA Medical Center. She has been a frequent guest on numerous television shows, including being a medical contributor for ABC Good Morning America, a frequent guest on other shows, including Fox Soul TV, Good Day LA, Fox 11, and The Doctors. This episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica is sponsored by Celtran Cellular Nutrition, a new line of nutritional beverages and supplements from Nestle Health Science that are formulated with cellular nutrients that go to work deep within your cells to address key sources of age-associated cellular decline, or AACD. Dr. Reid, welcome to the Ladies' Room.
Thank you, Dr. Donica. That was a wonderful introduction.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Did I do all those things? But
you know what's very interesting? I just finished listening to Shonda Rhimes' book, Year of Yes. And if you have not read this book, all my listeners have to read or listen to this book. But she talks about being at this Power 100 Women in Entertainment function. And she said she noticed that when each woman was introduced, they did one of three things, which was essentially either like cover their face, or apologize for all of their accomplishments, or say, did I really do those things? And I noticed I used to, when I was introduced, like to give a lecture or something at an event, I would always get up and I would respond minimizing my accomplishments by saying, and she is tired. She is very tired. But anyway, embrace your accomplishments. That was Shonda Rhimes' message for us, because we're gladiators and we wear the white hat. And we are the real doctors behind the stories of Grey's Anatomy. And of course, we're also in the midst of a worldwide pandemic. So the first thing I want to ask you is, how are you and your family doing personally?
You know, thankfully, we're doing well. We've gotten through this pandemic, I think, the best that we could. Thankfully, all of my close family members are still here. And I know that, you know, a lot of people can't say that. I did lose a lot of close friends. I can say that.
I'm so sorry.
And that was, you know, a challenge. And, you know, interestingly enough, not just due to the virus, but I think some of the side effects of the virus, if you will, a lot of mental illness and, you know, loss of a very close friend due to that in this last year. So, you know, been a challenge, but, you know, pushed through and have stayed prayed up throughout the entire time, you know, really just getting closer to God. And I would say that, you know, the one good thing that I think this pandemic has allowed for all of us is to take time to be still, you know, and really learning the power of stillness. Because prior to the pandemic, I think that we were so distracted, you know, just on on that rabbit wheel, going, and not thinking, not engaging, just going through the motions of things. But we were forced to be put, and it's in that stillness, I think, is when we really figure out what we want in this life, what's important, what we need to focus on. And so that was the one gift that I felt that I did receive during this time, is that it allowed for me to spend more time with my family and really reevaluate things in my life.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that you bring uniquely to this conversation as a certified yoga instructor, in addition to being a family medicine physician, because yoga focuses a lot on stillness and centering. And Pilates, Shonda Rhimes talks about how Pilates really figured into her reinvention of herself. I love, she said, when she discovered Pilates, she's like, how great is this? It's exercise you do lying down.
Exactly. Same for yoga, just, Shavasana, final resting pose. That's my favorite part of yoga. It's just the breathing, and taking that time just to be still. And, it gives you so much. It gives the movement that is needed, but the stillness that's required, to really get through this life. And that's one reason that I decided to make it a part of my practice, is because the more that I studied, the more that I, was in the position of a healer, if you will, or a clinician, just really finding out that our behaviors are really what dictate our outcomes. Yes, genetics plays a small role, but what we do every day really impacts how we live, and it impacts our longevity. So the things that we're doing every day or not and should, that is what's most important. And so I really wanted to figure out, well, what can I give my patients other than a 30-day prescription that's really going to give them a tool, a life tool to get through, because stress is inevitable. Challenges are inevitable, and almost everything, I think everything that comes at me in terms of a family physician, because I see pretty much everything, right? It always comes down to stress, and the things that people are going through in their everyday that then impacts their weight, that then impacts their blood pressure, that then impacts their emotional health. And so I wanted to give them a tool that can really address all of those things, and that, they can do for their entire life.
So how do you incorporate yoga and Pilates and movement into your medical practice? How does that work logistically?
So logistically, how does that work? So I actually have a yoga studio in my practice.
Okay.
So, it's a one-stop shop, if you will. You literally can come and get your physical and your PAP and maybe some Botox and do some Pilates at the end of the day. But we have a Pilates studio. We have a yoga studio. I am not physically teaching all of these classes or these sessions. I do have a team. Gotta have a team.
Gotta have a team.
Yes. So I do have certified instructors and therapists that are on board with me to help. But, it ends up coming up really in conversation, almost from the first meeting with my patients. They come in for me for their physical, but they're like, hey, I got this back pain, this sciatica that's been bothering me. Or, I've been struggling with anxiety and I don't know how to deal. And so literally in a lot of the sessions with my patients, I will go through pranayama, breath technique, breathing technique, learning how to breathe more efficiently, and learning how to use breath as a means of calming down the central nervous system, getting ourselves out of fight or flight mode. And so oftentimes it's just, even in conversation, we're doing yoga, just going through breathing in the exam room. And then, if need be, we have the yoga studio on hand, so they, would come in on a separate time to do, private sessions with a therapist.
That's awesome. So how did you go from being a dancer to becoming a physician? And you're actually our second guest who did that. Dr. Dervla McCann was a ballerina with the New York City Ballet before going to medical school. So tell us your journey and your story and how that happened to be.
I think I fortunately knew from a young age of what I wanted to do. So at the age of 5 is when I made the declaration to my mom, I want to be a dancing doctor.
Oh. Okay.
That was my dream. And I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know what that meant. But I think that what I understood was I had all of these interests, and one did not outweigh the other. I think that I knew as well at a young age, and that I was a child of God, and that when God gives, He gives abundantly. Mm-hmm. And so there's no need to forego focusing on one aspect to do another. I didn't have to choose. I can do both. And that was my journey. That was my plan. And so that's what I did. Dance was always my balance. So I always kept it in my life in some respect. So more so as a child and young adult for sure. So I did dance throughout elementary, high school, and college. And I did get to I guess a crossroads, if you will, when I graduated from college in terms of, okay, what are we really going to do, Noelle?
You're not 5 anymore.
Right. Are we going to be this professional dancer and really put all this effort into dance, or are we going to go to medical school? What are we going to do? And so I took a year off. I took a year break between undergrad and medical school just to kind of figure that out. And so I was living in Chicago at the time. So I'm from Chicago. And I had never been out to the West Coast. And I was like, well, let's see what LA has for me. And maybe we can, do something in Los Angeles. So I literally just, got on a plane, came out to LA by myself. I knew no one out here. And I just gave it a go. And I said, you know what, I'm just going to audition. I'm going to take some classes. I did get a job, though. I made sure that I had some steady income. So I actually worked for AmeriCorps. I don't know if people are familiar with, but it's similar to the Peace Corps, but it's within the U.S.
United States.
Yeah, so I worked for the I Have a Dream Foundation, and I was actually teaching youngsters. So I was at an elementary school teaching dance as well as science. Mm-hmm. So doing both things, but making sure that I had a check at the end of the day while I was able to then, audition. And I'm happy that I took that time because it really solidified for me what my role needs to be and what my life could be if I decided to go more of the entertainment route versus medicine. Because what I found as a dancer is that oftentimes your fate is not determined by self. It's not determined by your talent. It's not determined by your skill set or your training. It is being in the right place at the right time, knowing the right person in the right situation. And I did not want to put my fate in someone else's hands. I did not want to wait for that yes. Mm-hmm. I knew that if I had the credentials behind my name, no one could tell me no. Mm-hmm. And so medical school was what I was going to do. So I did take that year off to go through those challenges, still prepping myself for medical school and interviewing, during that time, and thankfully still doing that. So when I did get to that end of the year and, wasn't on any major show, was like, hey, so we're going to medical school now. But, everything in life serves as a
lovely fallback position.
I'm sorry?
What a lovely fallback position.
Exactly. It's something good to fall back into, right? Medicine. But I'm glad that I had those experiences because I really think that dance actually made me a better doctor. Mm-hmm. Because my perspective, the way that I see a human is likely a little different. Understanding that we're not compartmentalized. One system affects the other. We are multidimensional, mind, body, spirit. So we can't focus on one aspect of self and not the other. And that was how I built my practice, is that we were going to take a more holistic approach because in order to be optimally healthy, that's what we have to do. And I believe that as being a dancer is what, led me to that point.
So when I was in medical school, I was very inspired by a woman physician who was much older than me. So she must be 100 by now, Dr. Rose Frisch, who really did a lot of dance medicine. And her particular area of interest was athlete amenorrhea, which is when dancers in particular, but many other athletes, lose their periods because of being below a certain body weight. So dancers, of course, are notorious for being very careful about watching what they eat. Actually, one choreographer told me he tells his dancers to only eat anything they can sip through a straw. But So nutrition is extremely, extremely important to dancers as well as every other kind of athlete. So let's get into, you talked about behaviors and our life choices. We know that one of our most important life choices that most of us make at least 3 times a day is what kind of food and beverages we're going to put into our body. And what we're going to focus on is how that affects the actual cells within our body and cellular nutrition. So what is the science of cellular nutrition and why is this important? Why is this a thing?
So really, I think that we're moving into a new era, in terms of how we address nutrition, because we're learning so much more about the aging process. And yes, at the foundation of all things, proper nutrition, a balanced nutrition, a balanced intake is necessary. Movement is necessary. We're dynamic beings, which means we're made to move. So we have to have that incorporated in our everyday life. Now, cellular nutrition actually just looks beyond what our typical macronutrients and micronutrients do, right? So macronutrients meaning the foods that we eat, the carbs, proteins, fats. Micronutrients meaning the vitamins that we take in. And all of those things have their role, but there could be limitations. So cellular nutrients are actually those nutrients that penetrate at the cellular level, working to improve the function of the cell. So let's go back to cellular aging. As we age.
Well, let's go back to 9th grade biology.
Okay.
I very clearly remember the first sentence in the 9th grade biology textbook. I don't remember the rest of it, but I remember the first sentence. And that was, the cell is the building block of the human body.
Exactly.
And the cell is the building block of all living things. So tell us about the cell. What is the cell?
So
refresh us.
So the cell essentially is the smallest unit of life, right? So the cells are what make up the tissues, that then make up the organs and the organ systems that allow for us to function. So the cell is the numero uno, right? Where we begin. And from that, we grow into tissues and organs and organ systems.
And there's even smaller stuff in the cell.
In the cell. So there's different organelles within the cell. So different components of the cell that are important. One of the very important organelles or components of the cell is the mitochondria.
My favorite, the powerhouse. I remember from 9th grade, the powerhouse of the cell. That's what we used to
one
call
thing
it.
I never forgot either. I know what the mitochondria is. So the powerhouse of the cell is just that. It is the energy producer. So the mitochondria is responsible for producing the energy that the cell needs to do its work. Specifically, when we take in our food as our energy, right? So the carbs, proteins, fat, it needs to be broken down into a source that the cell can actually use. Mm-hmm. So the mitochondria helps to break down these food molecules into an energy source known as ATP. And that ATP is what allows for the cell to do its work. So as we age, so what research has shown as we age, the mitochondria, right, these plant powerhouses don't function as well. Mm-hmm. They don't perhaps produce the energy that they used to maybe 10, 20 years prior. And we start to see these cellular changes occur in our 40s. Mm-hmm. And these changes accelerate as we get into our 60s and beyond. So Age Associated Cellular Decline, which you mentioned earlier, Dr. Donica, is just that. It is the time-related deterioration that happens in our cells as we get older. And one of the hallmarks of that change goes back to the mitochondria, because it's mitochondrial decline, really, that is the cause or the reasoning behind this decline in the cell. So if you understand, again, the cell as the smallest unit of life, when that then declines in function, then the tissues and organs that cell makes up decline in function.
And as somebody who's approaching a very big birthday, I just want to point out that age is not the only thing that can cause our cells to decline prematurely. But that's what we're going to be focusing this topic on. But certainly all kinds of diseases, all kinds of medicines, all kinds of chemotherapy, many genetics, many other things can influence, and certainly stress can influence our cellular decline. But we're going to be focusing just on a very natural age-related process. All right, so I'm really glad you addressed this issue of the difference between macronutrients and micronutrients. That confuses a lot of people. I want to take a deeper dive now into the micronutrients. So of course, when we're talking about micronutrients, we are talking about vitamins, as you mentioned, but we're also talking about some minerals and some other substances. So talk to me more about that and how that ties into age-associated cellular decline.
Okay, so cellular nutrients would be, I guess, a specialized category of these micronutrients. And micronutrients, again, would be considered vitamins. So, our vitamin C, D, our B vitamins. These are vitamins that we typically can readily get from our diet. When we eat certain foods, we can get these vitamins, or we can take them in a supplement form. Cellular nutrients are a little bit different, though. So we don't typically get cellular nutrients from our diet. It's not necessarily readily available from our diet. So what research has found is that there's really three key cellular nutrients that have been well studied, okay? And that is nicotinamide riboside, which is actually a B3 derivative. So it's a special form of B3. And then there's urolithin A, which we can make when we eat certain foods, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And then there are special amino acids such as glycine and cysteine, or N-acetylcysteine, and these are the building blocks of glutathione, which is a powerful antioxidant that our cells make as well. And we can talk about that in detail in a moment. So these are really the three key cellular nutrients that there have been multiple clinical studies to look at in terms of how they impact cellular health. And specifically because we know that mitochondria, the decline in mitochondria being one of the hallmarks or key changes in cell health, this has been the target for intervention. So these cellular nutrients specifically help to improve mitochondrial function. So nicotinamide riboside specifically helps to boost NAD. So NAD stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. It's a very important molecule that's found in every cell of the body, and it is involved in the process of cellular metabolism. It's needed to produce the energy within the cell. Okay.
And what is NAD plus?
That's just the term that's used. So it's the same thing. So nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, this molecule is it's part of the processing within the cell where the food molecules are converted into ATP, right? So it's needed for the cells to produce the energy that the cell needs. But we know as we age, NAD declines. So specifically between the years of 40 to 60, it can decline by as much as 50%. So if you're losing half of your cellular energy production, you're going to feel that. And so that may present itself, as fatigue, or perhaps muscle weakness or lack of muscle stamina, impaired immunity. These are some of the physical manifestations that can occur with the decrease in cellular energy production or cellular function. So what we know is that, and what clinical studies have shown, is that when you supplement with nicotinamide riboside, this helps to boost NAD production, thus boosting the cellular metabolism, energy production of the cell, function of the cell, and then improve function, of course, of that tissue and organ, and perhaps the energy that we feel. Okay. Now, urolithin A. So urolithin A, as I mentioned, is something that we can actually produce naturally. So it happens in the gut. And when we eat certain foods, so things such as pomegranates, nuts, berries, they contain a compound known as L-glutathione. And when L-glutathione come in contact with our gut flora, or the bacteria, the natural bacteria in our gut, that is when urolithin A is synthesized, when it's produced. And
but how many pomegranates would you have to eat a day to get enough of this?
That's the question. So how much of these foods do we have to eat? And in addition to that, do we all have the proper gut flora that is necessary for this synthesis to occur? And what we know is that typically most of us don't. So only 1 in 3 adults actually have the proper gut flora to allow for urolithin A synthesis. So many of us would be lacking this.
And how would we know if we are one of those 1 in 3?
And you may not know, but it's important because urolithin A is involved in mitochondrial function of skeletal muscle cells. Okay, so it actually works to improve a process known as mitophagy. So mitophagy is actually the recycling process of mitochondria in skeletal muscle cells. So where you're essentially removing the underperforming mitochondria and replacing with renewed mitochondria.
In the same cells or in new cells?
And same cells, so in the skeletal muscle cells. Now, we know that in order for our muscles to function properly, the mitochondria need to be functioning properly. Mitophagy needs to be happening. So when this is not happening, that may present itself physically as muscle weakness or muscle fatigue. Okay. Now, again, there could be many other reasons why you feel fatigued and, overall, or perhaps have some muscle weakness. There could be other disease processes. But if that is not in place.
Well, and the number one reason people feel fatigued is just not getting enough sleep.
Not getting enough rest. Exactly.
So, which is an epidemic of its own.
Exactly. So always go back to the basics, go to the checklist in terms of things that may not be in place, but also understand in terms of the natural aging process, this could be one of them. And, if you are that individual that is perhaps not eating pomegranates daily or nuts daily and does not have that gut flora that you need, then supplementation, perhaps would be helpful to improve this process, to perhaps improve the function of our muscles.
And I do think now would be a good time to insert my public service announcement anytime we talk about topics like this, is that for anybody listening, if you are having fatigue or muscle weakness or any other kinds of unusual symptoms, the first place to start is actually getting a general physical from your primary care physician. So, that's the first thing. So what we're talking about is what's up and beyond that. Now, interestingly, the first time, I certainly didn't learn about this in medical school 100 years ago. We didn't even have a class in nutrition in my medical school, although my medical school was a forerunner because we did have a class in sex education in my medical school and was the first one to have that. But we didn't have anything on nutrition other than in biochemistry was the only place we got any nutritional information. So the first place I started hearing about NAD and its impact on skeletal muscle and muscle recovery was amongst athletes, and particularly, very high performing athletes who were really getting into this concept and very much into the idea of supplementing so that they could have not only better performance, but also better muscle recovery.
Yes.
And when I was an athlete, a competitive athlete many, many years ago, we didn't believe in recovery. Recovery wasn't even a thing. You worked out every single day for 2 hours a day, and you were a star if you threw up during or after your workout. But now the science of recovery and giving your muscles a chance to rest and repair is also extremely valued in athlete, in nutrition science and particularly for athletes and weekend warriors who happen to be 40 to 60.
Still pushing through. Exactly. And that's where cellular nutrients, potentially can be helpful as well, because we need the mitochondria to be working at its top level in order for there to be cellular repair, so to allow for that process to happen at the very basic level, at the cellular level, cellular nutrients can be impactful, in that way. And then getting to actually, now we can transition to cellular repair in dealing with our immunity. So I mentioned GlyNAC, which is short for glycine and N-acetylcysteine. These are the building blocks for glutathione. So glutathione is what is considered to be the master antioxidant. So it's actually something that we make on our own. It's present within our cells, and it actually works to protect our cells, to help repair, cellular repair. It combats those things that come at us, such as toxins, pollution, alcohol, poor diets, fatty diets, sugary diets, all of those things that can impact the way that our cells function. It's basically those sources of oxidative stress. Okay.
I'm laughing when you said alcohol, because the first time I learned about NAC was from a college student who was taking it. And I said, what do you have this for? And he said, oh, this is a great treatment for a hangover. I was like, oh, you learned such useful information in college.
Balance. Got to have balance. So, but yeah, so all of those things, and that's actually, what we like to achieve is the balance between the stressors and then those to combat those stressors, because stress is inevitable. Oxidative stress is inevitable. We're going to be exposed to pollution. We're going to be exposed to smoke.
Mhm.
Many of us are probably going to be drinking alcohol at some point in our life. So, how do we allow for that balance so there's not an overriding of those toxins, or really those free radicals that start to break down our cells? They start to break down the cell membranes and the DNA and those other components of the cells that then can lead to early aging. So the physical manifestations, the things that we see that probably mean more to us than talking about cells: wrinkles, right? Sagging skin, decreased exercise tolerance. These are the things that we see, when there's an imbalance of oxidative stress. And glutathione, being one of the antioxidants, helps to allow for repair and combat against those things. Now, what we know is that as we age, unfortunately, glutathione levels decrease, right? So that impacts our ability to fight off those toxins, and it impairs our immunity to work at its optimal level. But cellular nutrients can also have impact here. So when you take its precursors, so the amino acids, glycine, N-acetylcysteine, that helps to boost glutathione synthesis, and actually more efficiently than taking glutathione itself. So some people I already know about glutathione and are taking glutathione, but through the digestive process, glutathione can be broken down. So it really doesn't even get to the cell to have impact. But by taking the precursors, the building blocks, that actually helps to increase its synthesis or production within the cell. And
Okay, so run that by us one more time. The building blocks for glutathione are
the building blocks for glutathione
precursors.
The precursors are amino acids such as glycine and cysteine, N-acetylcysteine, which you would typically see in a oral supplement that you take, so like a derivative of that. So when those things are supplemented, that helps to boost the cellular production of glutathione, and this again has been clinically proven.
Great. So how does this all tie into what your average person should or shouldn't be doing on their own? And where can they go to get sort of like a program? Obviously, not everybody can come see you in Los Angeles. Where can they go to get more information about this and how to approach the concept of cellular nutrition and how it fits into their own lives and their own nutritional program and their exercise program?
Excellent question. So always understand that proper nutrition and exercise is at the very foundation, right? So that should always be in place. But now we have these added tools, these cellular nutrients that work in concert with that. And so one excellent location or source of information would be Celtran. So Celtran is a breakthrough nutritional line that includes these cellular nutrients. It's actually the first, I believe, to have all three of these cellular nutrients within one product line. So it is a nutritional line that includes nutritional beverages as well as oral supplements that can be taken to incorporate the nicotinamide riboside, urolithin A, and Glynac into your daily intake. So Celtran.com is actually, one website that you can go to. If you're social, at Celtran on Instagram would be another resource. But there's actually three main products within the Celtran line, and that being Celtran Cellular Energy. That includes the nicotinamide riboside that we spoke about that helps to boost NAD, boosting cellular energy production. It also includes B vitamins as well as vitamin C that are also helpful for promoting and aiding in proper metabolism. Celtran Cellular Strength is what would provide the urolithin A. So the urolithin A that allows for improved mitochondrial function within skeletal muscle cells and thus improving our skeletal muscle function, perhaps increasing muscle strength. And then there's Celtran Cellular Protect that includes a special blend of amino acids, the Glynac, glycine, and N-acetylcysteine that boosts glutathione synthesis that aids in boosting our immune function.
And how would somebody know which of these products they need and how much?
Good question. So I think it's more so in terms of, well, how do you feel? What are those challenges that you're having in your everyday life? Is it energy? And I think for most of us, it is, even when you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing. 'Cause I can attest to that. I try my very best at eating well and doing my yoga practice and praying and meditating and still tired at the end of the day. So
But are you getting enough sleep?
I am. I promise you, I try to get my 7 to 8 hours every night and still feel tired. And I am in my 40s, so I know that these changes are happening. So if you do feel that, that all of these things, you've seen your doctor, of course, you've ruled out other things. And because, yes, there are other disease processes for sure that can cause fatigue. You always want to check.
Disease processes and even deficiencies of some very basic nutrients. So one of the things I talk about a lot with respect to women's health is we know that 25% of all menstruating women have an iron deficiency. And iron is essential for being able to oxygenate your blood properly. And that is a very simple and also probably the classic example of a direct cause and effect between in this case, a mineral deficiency, not a vitamin deficiency, and, a clinical outcome. So, and that's something we also check all pregnant women for the same reason, because that would be terrible to overlook that in a pregnant woman.
Iron, I would say that for all women, especially definitely for those menstruating women, iron is very important and should always be checked. So I always do a vitamin panel for my patients. Iron is always on that panel because it is so important. It definitely has impact on, how we feel energetically, but also the way that all of our other organ systems are functioning, and can present itself that way in terms of fatigue, shortness of breath, depression, can affect us emotionally, also impact our fertility. I think women don't realize that either, is that, if with challenges in trying to become pregnant, not just while you're pregnant, but prior to pregnancy, iron is very important, within that process.
And also, I'm thinking, I'm trying to think of categories of people for whom this is a particular area of importance. So, we talked about athletes. We talked about menstruating females. Let's talk about vegetarians.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so what are the classic vitamin issues and nutrient issues you are concerned about in your patients who are vegans or vegetarians? And of course, those are two separate categories.
Yes. So remember, I live in Los Angeles. So I have a lot of vegans and vegetarians in my practice, and pescatarian and keto diet and everything else. So yes, iron deficiencies are very common. So I would say vitamin deficiency. So iron being one of them, vitamin D. So even living in a very sunny state, you would think that we don't have a lot of vitamin D deficient individuals, but I think that for most of us, and especially now during this pandemic, we don't get outside as much, and so it's not just intake, but also sun exposure that's necessary for vitamin D. So that's a very common deficient vitamin.
The statistic that I always remember about vitamin D is that about 40% of 40-year-old women are vitamin D deficient. So that is a test that I do also recommend that, all women have, because of course, vitamin D, the more we learn about vitamin D, the more we learn about its importance for just about everything in our body. But, as a women's health advocate, I'm particularly concerned about the connection with bone disease. So you can't really maximally absorb calcium if you don't have enough vitamin D.
Exactly. So definitely, in terms of as a means of prevention, for osteopenia, osteoporosis, you want to make sure that your vitamin D stores are optimal, and understanding too what optimal means, because just because it's in that normal reference range does not mean that it's optimal. So that's important to note as well. So, and people may not want to know this or not, but for generally speaking, when you see a lab, 30 is the marker for normal when it comes to vitamin D. So if you're at 30, great, good. Not optimal. It needs to be above 50. So, just keep that number in mind. Between 50 to 100, typically for most lab references, is where you want to have the vitamin D for it to be at its optimal level.
And that's an area where you have to, talk, each person has to talk to their own doctor about what's right for them. I think what's also important and very cool about vitamin D is that vitamin D is unique in that it's not just a vitamin, but it's a hormone.
Mm-hmm.
So it affects, so many different processes.
Oh, for sure. So, that's one of the key things that I check. When a patient comes into me and they say that they're tired or they say that they're depressed, I always check vitamin D, because vitamin D deficiency certainly can impact those things and be a trigger for those things. So yes, it impacts our energy, it impacts our metabolism, it impacts our mood, so many things that vitamin D has.
Our cholesterol metabolism.
Our immunity. And we need our immunity to be tip top right now.
Yes, we do. All right, so talk to me about other vitamins that are important for immunity.
So B vitamins are important as well, and I would say that because we're talking about vegans and vegetarians, B12 would be another one that is often deficient or insufficient. So here's another vitamin where, again, you want to know your numbers in terms of where you fall, because just being normal doesn't mean it's optimal. And I would say, for B12, that also impacts metabolism, but also impacts mood as well. So when you are low, when your B12 is low, you may feel low, not just energetically and physically, but also emotionally. And other B vitamins, such as B6, they are involved in neurotransmitter production. So all of these things have impact on how we feel, emotionally as well as physically. But I would say across the board, for my panel, what I check in all of my patients, regardless of, what their diet is or, how they identify themselves, I always check iron, B12, folate, and vitamin D.
Folate also extremely important for pregnancy. And of course, as physicians, we have to also caution everybody that just as all of these vitamins can have low levels with consequences, they can also have levels that are excessively high, especially if you're taking supplements. One of my pet peeves is people who go to the whole food store or the health food store, and they're getting their advice from some 17-year-old, not yet quite high school graduate, and they're getting all these supplements, and many of them have the same ingredients. So they could be double dipping or triple dipping and have serious consequences from having too much, which is what is nice about having one product line where you can get what you need. I also do want to highlight for people that another good source of information would be the website aacd.com, where there's a lot of information about Age Associated Cellular Decline. Now, I've hinted about my big birthday coming up, not just so everybody will send me presents, but you mentioned the age range 40 to 60. Are we just done when we get into our 60s? Then what happens?
Oh, life is just beginning. What are you talking about? That's the mid part. That's the midpoint.
I keep saying 60 is the new 40.
Exactly. No, that was just to say that in terms of research, where we see that the decline starts to occur is really kind of like at our midpoint of life, right? So around, or for most of us, hopefully, it's around 42 to 60 years of age is where you start to see these cellular changes occur, and then they continue. So yes, after 60, you're still doing things, you should still be doing things. And that's the whole point of, considering cellular nutrients, because you want to be able to still do whatever you want, right? And have that energy level that you want, have the muscle strength and stamina that you want, and still be able to function maybe perhaps at the level you were when you were, in your 30s and maybe early 40s. So these are nutrients that you can continue to take beyond 60.
We've been focusing on physical decline and physical symptoms, but of course we also have mental and cognitive changes as we age. Some of these are absolutely normal but scary, like why did I go into the kitchen? What was I looking for? Professor Wong at Princeton has a great book called Welcome to Your Brain. And I love what he says, like it's okay to forget where you put your keys. It's not okay to forget what the keys are for. But one of the things I forgot is I just gave out the wrong website, and the correct website is myaacd.org, not .com. So myaacd.org. That was one of those senior moments that I'm now entitled to. But talk to me about cognitive decline and cognitive function and the relationship between proper cellular nutrition and optimal cognitive function.
Mhm. So I think that, when we talk about cognitive decline, so these cells function similarly to any other cell of the body. So the same cellular processes that are happening in the muscle cells are happening in the gut cells, they're happening in the brain cells as well. And so there again, you want to make sure that, the mitochondria are functioning as they should, and that you are getting all of these key nutrients that allow for top-notch function. So the basics applies here too, making sure that you have proper nutrition so that you are getting in all of those other key vitamins such as the B's, so B12, B6, that impact brain function, as well as D vitamins. So here is another reason for checking a vitamin panel. So for those who come in for cognitive decline, I do the same thing. We're checking the vitamins to make sure that they're at optimal levels, and then also checking in with how much movement you're getting. So what we're finding as well is that with cognitive decline, a lot of it has to deal with movement, okay, and being sedentary. And actually, there's been some studies to show that, sitting for long periods of time has one of the most impactful, one of the major impacts on heart and brain health as we age, and one of the most important indicators in terms of disease as we age. And even for those weekend warriors, okay, so for those people who work out, 2 and 3 times a week, that activity doesn't negate the negative impacts that sitting throughout the course of the day can have on the heart and the brain. So what I always tell my patients, and especially now in this time of COVID, is that you cannot sit throughout the course of your day. Most of us are on Zooms, right? We have been forced to be in a more sedentary lifestyle. But if you were sitting for more than 30 minutes within the length of 30 minutes within a set point of your active hours of the day, you're sitting too long. Every 30 minutes, you got to get up and move around for a good 5 to 10 minutes and keep that as a consistent behavioral pattern, in addition to the yoga class that you take and going for a hike and all of those other things, because we need that for our brain health.
So is that your way of telling me it is time for us to get up and move? Because we have been sitting here for longer than 30 minutes, but of course I could talk to you all day, but I cannot let you go before you tell me what was your most unique, interesting, or memorable experience that you ever had in a ladies' room, aside from this interview.
That is a good question. I'm trying to think. Sober or non-sober?
If the non-sober is more memorable, then definitely the non-sober.
My most memorable, what I have to say is, I guess I'm going to take this back to aging, is what I have learned as I've gotten a little bit older, is that for some reason, when I even see a toilet, I have to go.
The power of suggestion.
Exactly. So I guess my most memorable is maybe not getting to the toilet fast enough and having a little accident. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? And reminding myself that I need to start doing my Kegel exercises.
So women who have any involuntary loss of urine, particularly when seeing the toilet, that's actually a very common feature of overactive bladder, is that you can make it till you get to the bathroom, but don't quite get from the door of the bathroom to the actual toilet. There's an expression for that also called toilet mapping, where people who have this condition make sure they know where all the toilets are on their daily route of commute or wherever they need to go. And my favorite cartoon quote that I have posted on my Instagram page is this great sign that says, "How long a minute is depends on which side of the bathroom door you're on."
Exactly.
So I will leave you with that. Thank you so much for joining us. We have learned so much. I will forward you any questions we get from our listeners. They can send them to me at askdrdonica@gmail.com. Of course, I'm always on Twitter and Instagram at Dr. Donica, DrDonnica. And how can people find your website?
So they can go to trinitymedgroup.com, and group is spelled GRP.com, or you can find me on Instagram. So if you're social, it's just my name, Noelle Reid, MD.
Reid is REID.
REID, yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
That's all we have time for today. But let's keep the conversation going on Twitter or Facebook at Dr. Donica. And please join us next week for another episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Real conversations with real women about really intimate topics.